How are we going today? I will help you decipher what in chaos is happening in the Bayoverse, all the way from Aesir's Ascension to the Bayonetta 3 2021 trailer. That's better. I want to establish that this is one of my interpretations that I genuinely believe is the closest to what is correct. And I've placed all the events chronologically and all the reasons for why timelines exist or certain timelines exist in the most logical way possible. I'm about to explain the whole Bayonettaverse for you. Welcome to the 90th episode of Bayonetta 3 Theories. I'm Rakunx, and this is the Separated Cereza's interpretation. In the beginning, nobody knows where the world came from. A struggle called the Armageddon caused the trinity of realities to be split into three realms: light, darkness, and chaos. The three worlds all needed rulers, and the one that ruled the chaos became known as Aesir. He spent the first eternity quietly looking upon the earth from his holy mountain. However, Aesir pitied the humans for their naivety and lack of free will, so the power he wielded was split into two equal halves and entrusted each to humanity's instincts, the right eye of light and the left eye of darkness. With control of the eyes of the world, the eyes that determine destiny, humans could choose their own paths. The inheritors of the eyes of Aesir had been granted the power of creation. This is the origin of the Bayoverse so far, until further notice. The Umbran Witches and the Lumen Sages were established around an eternity after Aesir was born, to oversee the left eye of darkness and the right eye of light. If you've played the games, you know by this time that the eyes of the world are essentially energy sources that chooses people who are worthy and not actual stones or artifacts. Though in doing so, Aesir was split into Lopter and Loki. Loki was part of Aesir that gave humanity the eyes of creation, as well as who inhibits the sovereign power. The sovereign power essentially is the power that allows you to govern both the eyes of the world at the same time, while Lopter was the one left over. The year zero has occurred, and 1,379 years later, Baldur was born. A year later, Rosa was born. The two eventually fell in forbidden love, and thus our Cereza was born on the 19th of December, 1411. And a year later, John was born. These are all the events that happened before any kind of time travel has occurred as of now. The first ever evidence of time travel, if you were to look at the timeline from afar, was that little Cereza, who was for a long time called Time Displacement Cereza, was taken from the past as an infant, and allegedly brought to at least before Chapter 2 of Bayonetta 1. As of now, it was allegedly Lopter, who was still sitting in Fimbulventer during the events of Bayonetta 1, who transported her, since he has that ability and essentially puppeteered everything to fall into place. But there is a theory that another god was responsible. They then have their adventures, which is our playthrough of Bayonetta 1, and it's important to know that our Bayonetta, teaches little Cereza to become empowered and therefore brave, that she can overcome anything. The player progresses through Bayonetta 1 until near the ending before fighting Jubelius. This is where our Bayonetta time travels back to the past, presumably to the same day that little Cereza was transported from, and tells her sleepy self that it was all a dream. Keep in mind that this little Cereza now has the values that our Bayonetta taught her, making her Brave Cereza. I've been using a Brave Cereza for the past 2 years because it's the best way to describe this Cereza, who is empowered and therefore brave. Much easier to differentiate. This point in the timeline is what I call the biggest Nexus event that changes the Bayoverse forever. And in this interpretation, this creates that second timeline that Mr. Kamiya mentioned. In the Brave timeline where little Cereza grew up and is empowered to continue to fight. In this secondary timeline, she was able to use the left eye of darkness, counterintuitively. This is why our Bayonetta suddenly had that red aura around her, since Mr. Kamiya stated that two axes of time had merged at that point.
背景が一瞬ね、あれが重なってですね。で、世界の目としてね。世界の目としてね。
Now, why they merged is anyone's guess, but if it's confirmed by Kamiya himself, I'm not questioning it. This was also part of Baldur's plan all along, and that is why he kept propagating that the little one was the key to her future. Could also be a foreshadowing of Bayonetta 3. Another detail to keep in mind is that our Bayonetta once taught little Cereza to wear her Umbran watch as a necklace, which she then adopted in her outfit during the witch hunts, in contrast to our Bayonetta who didn't wear it as a necklace. So keep this in mind. In this interpretation, to differentiate our Bayonetta from Brave Cereza in their ancient outfits, our Bayonetta does not wear her Umbran watch outside, while Brave Cereza does. This Brave second timeline is the first chapter you play in Bayonetta 1, since she is sporting her Umbran watch necklace without the red gem. I'll explain the red gem very soon. Disregarding little Cereza's adventure, in the main timeline of this interpretation, our Bayonetta remembers that she was sealed by John for 500 years, where John placed a protection spell on our Bayonetta when she was in her slumber. This was the red gem that she holds dear. Fast forwarding to Bayonetta 2, we get a glimpse of old Balder's death that happens right after the events of Bayonetta 1. A few days presumably pass and now Bayonetta 2 starts. The next evidence of time travel is that we see a young Balder arrive in present day. This is because Lopter, who lived throughout the years in the mountain of Fimbulventr, brought young Balder from the past to the present. More specifically in this interpretation, young Balder was brought from the second timeline to the present. Now, the reason why he's from the second timeline is because in the same scene, a Cereza is shown wearing her Umbran watch as a necklace, which we found out is the differentiator. So this must be an alternate timeline. We then progress through our adventures meeting Loki in Bayonetta 2 until we reach chapter 12. This is where Loki transports us to the past, back to the witch hunts in the second timeline. However, this branches off into an entirely new timeline, and you'll see why soon. We continue our adventure to then see Rose's death in real time, not as a flashback. The reason why I say this is a branch off from the second timeline is because of 1, there is no holy glaive, which there was in the flashback, and 2, the time differences between young Balder levitating to the portal and Cereza and John barging in. So therefore this must be an alternate timeline in this interpretation, separate from the main timeline and the Brave timeline. A third alternate timeline. As our Bayonetta and young Balder arrive in the present main timeline, we continue our adventures into versing Lopter, who eventually absorbs Loki's sovereign power, young Balder's right eye of lightness, and Bayonetta's left eye of darkness. The power of Aesir had been revived without Loki and grants Lopter the powers of the god of chaos. Loki then uses what he calls the trump card spell, Nothingness, to erase, quote-unquote, the eyes of the world from Lopter, which then weakens him enough for our Bayonetta and Balder to summon Omni and kill Lopter's physical body. The reason why I say quote-unquote erased is because I still believe that the Nothingness spell returned the eyes of the world from Lopter back to their original users. And the reason why I think they returned back to their original users is because the old Balder that we fought in Bayonetta 1 had the right eye, which we find out is the young Balder who fought with us against Aesir. I'll explain this very soon. Continuing on, Lopter's soul remains and plans to escape to a different era, but just in the nick of time, young Balder jumps in front of Lopter's soul and successfully absorbs him, risking his sanity. Young Balder then jumps into the portal, returning to the past in the main timeline, just after Rose's death, having partially been possessed. The reason why I believe he arrived after Rose's death is because of the huge pin that strikes the Umbran statue, which wasn't there before seeing Rosa. Also, the reason why I say partially possessed is because of the lipstick that Rosa gave him before he levitated into the portal. When he arrived back to his original time possessed, he must have had just enough sanity to place the lipstick in our Bayonetta's room. Kamiya then revealed that Lucas stole it from our Bayonetta's room, then used it as bait in chapter 5 of the first game. That is where the lipstick comes from. While being possessed, Balder, or now Balter, as a combination of Balder and Lopter, grew up throughout the years, which is who we versed near the end of Bayonetta 1. Almost a complete circle. So logically, in this interpretation, there are 3 timelines that coexist, which is quite synonymous to the alleged Mother Maiden Crone motif in the Bayonetta 3 2021 trailer. So if I were to update my multiversal war theory, instead of the Records of Time Cereza, you have the third Cereza, the one where there is no glaive in the background. But again, that is just a theory at this point. Now here is where it gets interesting and kind of bringing some Loki and Spider-Man No Way Home feels into this. What about the Records of Time Cereza? The one where Kamiya stated that was a parallel universe, and the other Cerezas that I'd like to put forward. Remember what I said about the biggest Nexus event of the Bayoverse. Now, why I said that is because this is the cherry on top. pun intended. This is the shift of mentality of Cereza to be empowered and brave, which ultimately changes everything you do, especially when taught at a young age. This point in time allowed for the Bayonetta multiverse to occur, which I still think is a theory until proven otherwise. In the 40th episode, I tried to find reasons and Easter eggs and golden nuggets to explain different timelines. But what if it's just as simple as one event that butterflies into the multiverse of madness? No pun intended. Where potentially trillions of adult oh my god, I love this theory already. Where potentially trillions of adult Cerezas now exist. This simple multiversal divergence could explain the unexplainable scenes we've seen throughout Bayonetta 2 and others, such as the Records of Time scene, the Bayonetta 2 menu screen scene. I even jokingly say the Smashverse, Anarchy Reigns, Shin Megami Tensei Liberation, the rumored DMC x Bayonettaverse, and Wonderful 101. And also it could explain the Bayonetta Bloody Fate movieverse. Of course, I say the last 6 as a kind of joke. I still think that the Bayonetta 2 menu screen and the crossovers are ultimately a warm-up of what's to come and marketing campaigns respectively. But I still think this Nexus event of bringing an empowered, brave Cereza back to her original time would be a great accidental explanation for all of these scenes. So just to make it clear, in this interpretation we can see more than 6 Cerezas: our Bayonetta, Brave Cereza, No Glaive Cereza, Records of Time Cereza, Bayonetta 2 menu screen Cereza, Bloody Fate Bayonetta, and jokingly, the crossovers. I also want to point out the teasers, the reveals that showed Bayonetta and Cereza fighting the minor antagonists of their games. I don't see these as actual events 1:1, but more so illusions, or allegories of what's to come in the next games. I even think the 2017 trailer is an illusion. Not illusion, an allusion of what is happening in the multiverse with different Cereza timelines. And there's someone out there hunting them. Because you have to remember, it's possible that the advent of multiple timelines happened because of this Nexus event that our Bayonetta started. This would have caused possibly a second Armageddon in different alternate universes, which is why the Records of Time possibly is the end in that timeline. There might be another timeline where someone wants to put a stop to this, and you do that by killing as many Cerezas, as many forbidden children as you can. Now, it's time to look at Bayonetta 3, more specifically the Bayonetta 3 2021 trailer. Where does that fit? If you've seen the past Bayonetta 3 theories, you know I've been dictating that this is Brave Cereza, the little one who we raised in the first game who is now grown up. This is because of her different demeanor, her Lolita style, her poses, her fashion, and the way she wears her Umbran watch. So this would fit into the second timeline that we've initially created. But what about the red gem that is clearly shown on her watch? If this Brave Cereza was never sealed, then why would she have the red gem that John casts? That we can only theorize until the game comes out. As a joke, I just say that Brave Cereza in her timeline probably made a red gem or just got another red gem and put it on her watch because it looked pretty. Something, you know, that Brave Cereza would do. In all seriousness, this small detail of a red gem on her Umbran watch is what made me think of another interpretation. The combined Cereza interpretation, in which everything is the same, except there is no third timeline, nor even a second timeline. Just a singular timeline that shapeshifts and molds itself to fit whatever happens in the past. The combined Cereza interpretation uses the singular timeline plot device where when you change something in the past, it changes your future. And this makes it possible for different scenes to happen. That small percentage I said before that this is our Bayonetta, where Nintendo and PlatinumGames are like, live with it. That small percentage is explained in this combined Cereza interpretation. That this is our Bayonetta. The singular timeline plot device is something I personally dread, because it's an easy fix, but it's still evident in many pop culture series, which is why I'm not going to rule it out. So we have the separated Cereza interpretation and the combined Cereza interpretation. The latter is how I believe the Bayoverse was really meant to be written, and how, in the end, they just converged into one singular timeline, with the addition of the Nexus event that sprouted the unexplainable scenes of the Bayonetta 3 multiverse. How are we going